Well, hi guys. We're doing today our half argument or our half angle formulas, and you're going to be working out of the book tomorrow. But before we do that, we're coming up pretty soon here on Christmas, and this is a town on Christmas Day, and it's such a pretty picture. And I don't know if you know what town this is, but this was Kansas City. I really like Kansas City skyline. I just like the town. But do you know how people shorten Kansas City? They usually say KC. Of course, you could just write that out as KC. So there's a shout out for KC there. I hope you like that. Anyway, all right. So we're going to go to our formula chart so we can take a look at what we're working with. And on our formula chart here, we are on the back page, and we are doing half argument. And this is a little bit tricky because you can see some square roots here and some plus or minus. This means you have a choice, and your choice has to be the right choice. You can't just, eeny, meeny, miny, mo this. You actually have to know what's going on. So we're going to be using those three formulas, and so you might want to pull your formula chart up. So because I'm on my video, I'm just going to reference those formulas. And again, we have this instance where tangent of half x has three different forms, and of course these other two forms look cleaner, but they require you to know sine of x. If you just know cosine, you'll have to use this little square root form. Okay, so here we go. Minimize that, and we're going to start with, let me get a pen here, like in the blue. So we are going to find the exact value of the sine of 22.5 degrees. And we are going to do this without a calculator. And this is going to be sort of crazy. Now, if you do the sine of 22.5 degrees on your calculator, you're going to get this decimal. It goes on forever. And so what we are going to need to do is find the sine of 22.5 by using our half angle formula. And we're going to have the formula that says the sine of 1/2 x, or you can think about that as x over 2, is equal to plus or minus the square root of 1/2 times 1 minus cosine x. That's on the formula chart. So we need to know that 1/2 x and x are related by the fact that the x inside this parentheses that's inside the square root is double the size of this angle out here. 1/2 x is half of x, or x is double 1/2 x. So I could find the sine of 22.5 if I knew the cosine of the angle that was twice as big as this. And the angle that's twice as big as this is 45 degrees. And I can do that. Now it's going to be a square root, but you saw on your calculator, if you happen to type that in, you're going to get an irrational number. And square roots of non-perfect squares are irrational. And we're going to deal with this plus or minus in just a second. So we know the cosine of 45 degrees, of course, is 1 over the square root of 2. So this is going to be plus or minus the square root of 1/2 times 1 minus 1 over the square root of 2. Now what you have to do now is, if you want to simplify this, you can distribute this 1/2 through. I'm going to keep the plus or minus there. And if you distribute that 1/2 through, we get 1/2 minus 1 over 2 square roots of 2. There's a square root inside a square root. It's Inception with square roots. Okay, so now you have to choose. Is this positive or negative? Well, you're going to have to know a little bit about all students take calculus, or all students take calculus. Quadrant 1, everything's positive. Quadrant 2, only sine is positive. Quadrant 3, only tangent is positive. And quadrant 4, only cosine is positive. Where is 22.5 degrees? Well, that happens to be in quadrant 1. And in quadrant 1, all trig functions are positive, so we are going to say this is the positive version of that answer. And there's going to need to be some thought whether or not you're going to pick the positive or the negative. Okay, so then let's go to another page here, and let's do another example. Let's simplify sine of 21 over 1 plus the cosine of 21. So let's go look at that formula chart and see what that looks like. You're going to see that this looks like a tangent of 1/2 x formula. And you saw the tangent of 1/2 x is the one that has 3 different forms of it, and the sine of x over 1 plus cosine x equals tangent of 1/2 x. So what you have to understand is, what does the 21 represent? The 21 is your x, so you need to know what 1/2 x is, and half of that would be 10.5. So this simplifies into the tangent of 10.5. Okay, and the last thing you're going to have to do is you are going to have to find the sine of x over 2, the cosine of x over 2, and the tangent of x over 2, given some information. So let's do, given cosine x is -4/5. And also you're going to need some other information, and that other information is, where is x? What quadrant is x in? So let's say 180 is less than x is less than 270. What quadrant does that put us in? Bigger than 180, so that's past quadrant 2, less than 270. This tells us that we are in quadrant 3. I had some of you ask me, why do I need this extra information here? This tells you where to draw your triangle, but this tells you where x is. This does not tell you where x over 2 is, and that's something that we're going to need to look at. So I'll come back to that statement in just a second when we have to choose that plus or minus. So I'm going to start with the sine of x over 2 formula, and that sine of x over 2 formula is plus or minus the square root of 1/2 times 1 minus cosine x. I'm given cosine x, so this is just throwing it straight into the formula. Plus or minus the square root of 1/2 times 1 minus -4/5 is really 1 plus 4/5, which is plus or minus the square root of 1/2 plus 4/10 or 2/5, which gives me plus or minus the square root of 9/10, which is plus or minus the square root of 9 is 3, and 10 doesn't have a perfect square root. So now we have to figure out, are we going to choose the positive or the negative version of this? And I'm going to come back up here to this inequality. If x is between 180 and 270, we need information about where x over 2 is. X over 2 is going to be between 90, because half of 180 is 90, and half of 270 is 135. This gives you an interval for where x over 2 is. And x over 2 is in between 90 and 135, tells you that it's in quadrant 2. So if you just found the sine of that angle and it's in quadrant 2, are you going to pick the positive version or the negative version? Well, sine is positive in quadrant 2, so you better pick the positive version. So the sine of x over 2 is 3 over the square root of 10 positive. All right. Cosine of x over 2 is going to equal, from your formula chart, 1/2 of 1 plus cosine x. So that's going to equal plus or minus the square root of 1/2 times 1 plus a -4/5 is 1 minus 4/5, which is plus or minus 1/2 times 5/5 minus 4/5 is 1/5, which is plus or minus the square root of 1/10, or 1 over the square root of 10. Now, since this is x over 2, and you know that x over 2 is in quadrant 2, then what is the value of cosine in quadrant 2? Cosine quadrant 2, we went left, that's negative. So I better pick the negative version of that. Okay. And the last value is tangent of x over 2. Well, since I just went through all this trouble of finding sine of x over 2 and cosine of x over 2, then I can find tangent by doing sine divided by cosine. So I'm going to do the sine value divided by the cosine value, and I'm going to get that you flip it over and multiply, those square roots of 10s cancel, and we get -3. Of course, you could plug it into the formula, but I don't see why you would do that. So anyway, this last little shout out here goes to Sarah Curran. Sarah Curran, one of my favorite movies is Unforgiven, or you could also use Tombstone, but Tombstone has a lot of good scenes in it, so I'd probably use, if you watch Tombstone, pick that for your little project. So there's my shout out for Sarah Curran. I will see you guys tomorrow.